The time when we begin this study is BC 534, when Daniel had the vision recorded here. The place where he was, the junction of the Tigris and Euphrates River, near that place. The speaker, the angel Gabriel, the inspired recorder, the prophet Daniel. And we're going now to go through this 11th chapter, first of all, and insert as we go along what we believe to be the fulfillment of the prophecy according to the records of history, the best that we can find, beginning with the reign of Darius in Daniel's time, who conquered the city of Babylon and captured it from the Babylonians, to the reign of Tiberius Caesar and the crucifixion of the Prince of the Covenant. This is the first part of this vision. Cyrus the Great, who reigned from 558 to 529, was a Persian who conquered Media and Babylon, and Darius the Mede was a governor of Babylon under Cyrus. Darius dies, and Cyrus makes Babylon his capital. Now, anyone who wishes to have their own Bible in hand and listen to the 11th chapter as we read it, putting in the names of the men who fulfilled the prophecy, may enjoy it in that way. Beginning with verse 1, reading the words of the angel Gabriel. Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, Gabriel, stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up, that is, begin to reign, yet 3 kings in Persia, Cambyses, Smerdis, and Darius Hystaspes. And Xerxes, that is the 4th, shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Now this was fulfilled. Herodotus, the Greek historian, tells us that he approached with an army of 5,283,000, beside 300,000 Carthaginians, over 5.5 million. This seems impossible, but it was a mighty host. And a mighty king, that is Alexander the Great, shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Alexander the Great defeated the Persians at the Battle of Arbela in 331 before Christ. And Greece, the power of Greece then becomes universal as far as these biblical empires are concerned. Verse 4, And when he shall stand up, that is, when Alexander is at the height of his power, his kingdom shall be broken. Now he died in 323 A.D., at an early age, and shall be divided. His kingdom shall be divided into 4 kingdoms, toward the 4 winds of heaven, the prophecy says, north, east, west, and south, but not to his posterity, that is, not to his descendants. His generals fought over his kingdom from the time of his death until the year 301 BC, just about 20 years, a little over 20 years. At the Battle of Ipsus it was decided, and his 4 leading generals divided the empire, just as the prophecy said they would, in the 4 directions in respect to Palestine, Daniel's homeland. And not to his posterity. He left no son who was able to follow him. His 4 leading generals took the kingdom and divided it. His descendants got none of it, and no one gets all the dominion ruled by Alexander either, for his kingdom shall be plucked up. The great empire was shattered, and a good part of it was divided, but there were parts which were not. Cassander took the west. He was one of the leading men, probably the strongest of all the generals. Lysimachus taking the north, Seleucus taking the east, Ptolemy taking the south. They assumed titles of kings in BC 305. Ptolemy Soter, that means Ptolemy the Savior. He was given that name by the people of the island of Rhodes, whom he helped against one of their enemies. shall be strong, and one of his princes, that is one of Alexander's princes, Seleucus Nicator, who took the north and became the king of the north part of Alexander's kingdom, shall be strong above Ptolemy, and have dominion. Seleucus Nicator's dominion shall be a great dominion. Now Cassander's territory was taken by Lysimachus, and he lost it all to Seleucus. So now there are just two kings who divide Alexander's empire. Seleucus, the king of the north, the one who ruled the territory in the Bosphorus, had 3 parts of Alexander's kingdom, while Ptolemy had 1 part. And we find that Seleucus also controlled Asia Minor and Syria and Palestine. And he shall have great dominion, and it was. And in the end of years, Ptolemy Philadelphus and Antiochus Theos, the successors of these kings that had ruled these 2 parts before them, shall join themselves together, for Ptolemy's daughter, Bernice, shall come to Antiochus Theos to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the power that is of Antiochus' arm. Neither shall he stand, nor his seed, but Bernice shall be given up, and the Egyptian attendants that brought her, and he whom she brought forth, that is her son, and he that strengthened her in these times. Note the details that the prophecy gives. Antiochus, Bernice, and her son and attendants were all murdered, B.C. 246. They could not stand before this king. But, out of a branch of her roots now, but Ptolemy Euergetes, a son of Bernice's father, shall stand up in his estate. That means begin to reign. Which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of Seleucus Callinicus and his mother Laodice, the king of the north. The capital of the kingdom at that time was at Babylon, by the way, and shall deal against them and prevail. Callinicus had a brother, Antiochus Hirax, that means the hawk, who had command of a large army in Asia Minor. He was a traitor to his brother, Callinicus, and it's all involved here in this prophecy. And shall also carry captives. Notice, they gathered a great group of captives and carried along with them and denuded the country. And it says here in this prophecy that they would carry captives into Egypt, their gods with their princes. They took the idols, the images with them, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. The very Egyptian gods Cambyses had stolen out of Egypt many years before, out of the Egyptian temples, were brought back to Egypt. And Ptolemy returned with these. The people named him Euergetes, which means benefactor. He had brought these idols back to Egypt, and many of those are still there and can be seen in the great museum of Cairo and in some of the ancient temples. Those gods had had a long journey to the east, been carried away into Syria, or rather Assyria and Persia, in that part of the world, and now were brought back to Egypt by this Ptolemy Euergetes. Ptolemy the benefactor, they called him. And he brought back a great deal of silver and gold, this prophecy says, at least $30 million worth of gold. And it says here that he shall continue more years than Seleucus Callinicus, the king of the north. So he lived longer, this king of Egypt. Euergetes lived between 4 and 5 years longer than Callinicus, and he died in 221 before Christ. So, this king of the south, Ptolemy Euergetes, shall come into Seleucus Callinicus' kingdom, in the king of the north. He's going to invade the north, and shall return into his own land. Now, this remarkable campaign only lasted about 1 year. Armies couldn't move so far and so fast then as they can now. They had to move on their feet and either carry their food with them or rob the country as they went. The latter was what they usually did. And on Euergetes' march home, he visited the temple at Jerusalem and laid gifts upon the altar there. And this brings you to, well, down into about 240 along at that time. But Seleucus Callinicus, that's the king of the north, his sons, Seleucus Caranus and Antiochus Magnus, we don't need to remember all these names, but these were the sons, these sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. They got up a big army to go down into Egypt and try to get even with the king of Egypt. In fact, they didn't hold back from poisoning and otherwise killing their political enemies in those days. And his forces, a great force from the king of the north, now starts south. And Antiochus Magnus shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. He recovered Syria from Egypt and Phoenicia, all except the city of Sidon. He established the winter quarters at Ptolemais in BC 218. That was, Ptolemais was not far there on the coast from Jerusalem, a little bit north of it. And so you see he'd pushed down quite a ways. The Egyptian king had captured that part of the country. They fought back and forth over Palestine. And now this king of the north, Seleucus, Antiochus Magnus, those two men worked together at first, and finally his brother Magnus went on and raised this great army and took back a lot of the territory their father had lost. Now we come to the 11th verse of the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel. And here he talks about the king of the south again, that is Ptolemy Philopater. They all had an extra name to just show us which Ptolemy it was. Ptolemy was the general name, the family name of all the kings of Egypt at this time. Now remember, they were Greeks, really, who were the rulers of Egypt. They were not the native Copts of Egypt, and the Arabs had not come in yet into Egypt, so that it was a country descended from the ancient Egyptians and ruled over by the higher classes, at least, were mostly Greek, especially in Alexandria, which was the capital in those days. All right, we begin with the 11th verse now. And Ptolemy Philopater shall be moved with choler, that is anger, and shall come forth and fight with him. When this great army was coming down from the north and had already taken a lot of this territory away from the Egyptian king's rulership, in 217, as it marched 217 BC, as it marched southward, the Ptolemy Philopater came out with great anger, it says here, to fight with him. That is, fight with the king of the north, even with Antiochus Magnus. Well, what happened? What happened in this war? And Antiochus Magnus shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hands of Ptolemy Philopater. That was at the Battle of Raphia. There were about 62,000 foot soldiers and 6,000 horse and 102 elephants in that battle. Remember, that is in the battle of the great multitude brought down against Egypt. Remember that the elephant in those days was the same as the tank in these days. The horses are terribly afraid of elephants. And often just one elephant would set a whole squadron of horses mad, and they'd be ruined as far as doing anything in a battle. But this king had 102 elephants. He had a mighty line that couldn't be broken very well by horsemen or foot soldiers, and could trample right over the usual soldiers as they tried to carry on the battle. So we can imagine in those days 62,000 men was really a big army. And the feeding of them and taking care of them was a terrible thing. And you can imagine the devastation of the country as these armies went back and forth, north and south. The king of the south, Egypt, and the king of the north, whoever ruled Palestine and Syria and what is now Turkey, back and forth they fought year after year and century after century. Now verse 12. And when Ptolemy Philopater, that's the king of the south, hath taken away the multitude, he was engaged in this great army, this multitude of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus Philopater rather, his heart shall be lifted up. This battle encouraged him to win such a battle as this and destroy such a great multitude as this, made him very proud and egotistical. And he shall cast down many 10,000s. Well, unfortunately, he began persecutions of the people at Alexandria in his own country, and in Jerusalem and elsewhere. In Alexandria, there were probably at this time several 100,000 Jews. They had a great settlement there with many synagogues. They controlled a lot of the business. They had famous scholars. They They added greatly to the economy of Egypt in those days. And of course the king, this Greek king, was a pagan, and he was stirred up by the pagan priesthood to persecute these people, which he did. And also, even now controlling Palestine, he went so far as to persecute them in their own country, in Jerusalem. He shall cast down many 10,000s. But notice the next words, but he shall not be strengthened by it. These acts turned many of his own nation against him. Not only of the Jews, who were a strong group in the country, especially in its economy, its business, the making of arms, of all these things, but a great many of his own people turned against him because it hurt their business, hurt their economy. And so the king really did not gain by starting these religious persecutions. Nearly always in the history of men, history of nations, religious persecution has hurt a nation. We know that in the Middle Ages, persecution of religion hurt the countries where it was practiced, hurt them economically and in every way. Later on, in the 16th century and the 17th century, great bodies of people had to flee from their own countries, and many of them were the best artisans, the best workmen in many lines, and successful businessmen, so that the countries took many years, some of them centuries, to recover from their loss. Now we come to verse 13. This says here that this king of the south was not strengthened by his attempt to wipe out thousands of people, even tens of thousands. Now the king of the north is brought in again, for Antiochus Magnus, who was still the king of the north, shall return. Now he got whipped the first time he went down with this big crowd, but he shall return. He didn't give up easy. He advanced back to the south again, through Syria, down into Palestine, ready to fight again, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former. Now that was a great army which he brought down there, with its 102 elephants and 5,000 horsemen and 60,000 footmen. But it says here, the prophecy says, he shall come with a still greater army. He did not give up. He came back for another battle, or battles. He shall certainly come after certain years. At the end of times, the margin says, even years. In fact, it was 14 years later. It was in 204, I believe, when he came back with this bigger army. Shall come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. Of course, these kings gained their riches largely by squeezing the people, high taxes which were used to raise these armies. Even today, the cost of warfare is exorbitant. No nation today can really afford to fight too long because the cost is so great. Now, verse 14 of Daniel, the 11th chapter. And in those times there shall many stand up against Ptolemy Epiphanes. That's the Egyptian king. Ptolemy Philopater died in B.C. 204 and was succeeded by another king of the south, Ptolemy Epiphanes. And he's called the robbers of thy people, the margin says, or the children of robbers in Hebrews. So in those days there shall many stand up against Ptolemy Epiphanes. Also the Romans, that's the robbers of thy people. They were noted for robbing the various nations where they went. There have been many modern examples of this. The Romans often would conquer a country and take its finest statuary to Rome to adorn the homes of the elite or the emperors. He would carry off vast riches from these various countries. There's something interesting along this line to remember, and that is that the riches of the ancient world have been all gathered by Babylon. Babylon became the richest city of the world, the first of the four great empires of prophecy. Of course, no one knows the actual amount of the gold treasure of Babylon. She was called the Golden City, but it was a vast treasure. When Babylon fell, this great treasure, of course, was captured, taken by the Persians. They added to it greatly. Their empire extended to 127 provinces from India clear to Ethiopia and Africa, and through the 2 or 3 centuries that Persia ruled the world, civilized world of those days, she greatly added to this treasure. Then, when Medo-Persia went down before Alexander the Great, he, of course, took the treasure of Persia and added to this by his great invasions clear into India and over much of the ancient world. So the treasure was a vast one. And finally, when Rome came, the fourth great empire, she inherited the treasure of the Greeks and added to this. As long as this treasure was extant, the civilized world carried on business pretty well. It did not yet know the way of handling money by checks or a central banking system, but they used actual metal, gold and silver, and so on. Finally, this great hoard of wealth that Rome had accumulated was disturbed and taken and lost by Alaric, who invaded Rome, one of the barbarian generals who served Rome but was finally rebelled against the Rome itself. He captured this money, all of this gold hoard, and took it with him in his army as they went south through Italy, and finally he died on this journey with his army, devastating the countries they went. His followers buried him in the bottom of a river. They turned the river back with a dam, buried him in the bottom of the river, and put this great gold hoard with him, covered it up, and then killed all the slaves that did the work. The river flowed back, and no one to this day knows just where it was. There have been some cases of draining rivers, or that river, whatever it was. Even Mussolini, we're told, tried to find this great gold hoard. After this, the Dark Ages came down, which some people attribute largely to the fact that there was no gold basis for business for many centuries. Finally, Spain opened up the mines of Peru and Mexico, and money began to flow, actual gold, silver began to flow into Europe again, and a new age came. This at least had something to do with it. So it says here that in these times there shall many stand up against the king of Egypt, Ptolemy Epiphanes. Also the Romans shall exalt themselves to establish a vision, but they shall fall. Epiphanes, 5 years old, became king. His guardians sent an embassy to Rome in 202. Evidently, they wanted the support of Rome to help their little baby king get along until he got older. The Romans usually accepted such invitations as this and took advantage of it and made themselves ruler of any country which took their protection. All right, now let's go back to the king of the north in the 15th verse. So Antiochus shall come and cast up a mount. To take a city, they used to cast up a mount. That is, they would build a mound of earth up against the wall of the city. And if they succeeded in building this mountain of earth till it got to the top of the wall, they could march right up onto the wall and get control of the wall and soon capture the city, or beat down the top part of the wall with their battering rams. He shall build up a mount, it says here, cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities. And the arms of Ptolemy Epiphanes shall not withstand, neither Scopas and his army, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. In 203, now this great war came led by Antiochus Epiphanes. The city munitions, the city fortifications of Gaza, the great key to the road south into Egypt, was captured. And here we find that the chosen people, that is, the people of God, the Jews who still were there, were involved in this and were trampled down. The people of the Lord are first brought in here as His chosen people in this prophecy. But, 16th verse, Pompey, the Roman, he was the one leading the Roman army now that came in and took over, that cometh against Antiochus Magnus, shall do according to his own will. In 65 B.C., Pompey beat out the former king of the north and went down into Egypt, and they never departed from this part of the world. He says here, he shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, that's the Holy Land, which by his hand shall be consumed. Palestine was conquered by the Romans under Pompey at this time, 63 B.C. Then it says it is Julius Caesar who came to Palestine to take part in this. He was just getting his great power. Shall also set his face to enter by force the whole kingdom. It was he who finally took the kingdom and became strong above all the others in Rome, including Pompey. Those who tried to oppose him in the Holy Land were overcome. Antipater, the Idumean, with him. By the way, Antipater was the father of the man who became known later as Herod the Great. Thus shall he do. And Caesar shall give himself Cleopatra. She was a daughter of women. She succeeded her father as the queen of Egypt. She was a Ptolemy, corrupting her. Now, Rome's side, she pretended to be on it, but she was a very clever politician. It says here, though, she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. She stood by Caesar only as long as she felt it would do her good and be to her interest to do so, but readily turned to Antony, who was the enemy of Caesar, and with him later fought against Rome. You see, this was a great political love affair between Cleopatra and Antony. And Antony, Pompey, and Julius Caesar were rivals for the power of ruling the world. Now we come to verse 18. After this shall he, Caesar, turn his face unto the coastlands, and shall take many. The coastlands, ruled by Pharnaces, he captured in 47 B.C., that is, coastlands of Asia Minor. And that's where he sent that very famous report home, Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. But Brutus, a prince called here in the prophecy, Brutus was his enemy from Rome, but Brutus, for his own behalf, shall cause the reproach offered by Caesar to cease. Without Brutus' own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon Caesar. Caesar was ready to take the crown as king and close the history of the Republic of Rome in name as it had already ceased to be in fact. Brutus posed as a friend of the Republic, and Caesar's overwhelming ambition was made the occasion of his death. Brutus led a group of men to kill Caesar, and Caesar was slain right in the forum where he had been speaking, and these men who claimed to be patriots upholding the Republic assassinated him. The story is that when he saw among these men his friend Brutus, he couldn't believe it hardly. Up to that moment he had been attempting to defend himself with his stylus, his writing instrument, which was like a sharp-pointed knife. There were 27 of these assailants. Their faces were covered. And when his robe was pulled away and he saw the face of Brutus, he said, Et tu, Bruti, thou too, Brutus. And he just covered his face and permitted them to finish him off. Now we come to verse 19. Then Caesar shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. This refers, of course, to his death. This is the last return of Caesar, probably from the Spanish rebellion. When he came back to Rome, he was assassinated when presiding at the Roman Senate, March 15, B.C. 44, the Ides of March. Then shall stand up in Caesar's estate Augustus Caesar, a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. He's called here a raiser of taxes. He came to the throne now and took the place of Julius Caesar. Of course, they still called themselves Republicans. They still claimed they were acting as a republic and got their authority from the Senate. But this statement here in the prophecy that he was to be a raiser of taxes is certainly appropriate, because that's exactly what he was. And you remember that it was when he had the whole world of the Roman Empire enrolled for taxes that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. And Joseph and Mary had to take him to Bethlehem. Everyone had to go to their hometown to enroll for these taxes, the paying of these taxes. So it's very appropriate here in the prophecy, long before Augustus Caesar was born, to be called a raiser of taxes. 21st verse. And in Augustus' place shall stand up Tiberius, a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom. In AD 14, he had ruled under Augustus 2 years, or from AD 12. Augustus himself said of Tiberius that he was too vile to follow as imperator or emperor. Tiberius was really his adopted son, and he ruled with Augustus for a number of years before Augustus died, and then Tiberius took over. But he shall come in peaceably, that is, with no fight, no battle, which he did. He just inherited the power of ruling the Roman Empire when Augustus died, and obtained the kingdom by flatteries. He pretended to be very diligent and virtuous, and his mother obtained the kingdom for him by flattery. 22nd verse, Daniel 11. And the arms of the overflower, that's Tiberius, shall be overwhelmed. He died in AD 37. Jesus died on the cross in 31 AD, as near as we can tell, right at that time. He died during the reign of Tiberius. We hear following Bishop Newton's rendering, Tiberius, who was a flood or an overflower, was himself to be overflown. He was smothered to death by Marco in behalf of Caligula, who desired to succeed him as the ruler of Rome. So it says here in this prophecy, Tiberius shall be overflown from before him and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenant, that's Jesus Christ our Lord, shall be broken. Crucifixion taking place in the spring of 31 AD at the Passover season. It was in this reign, with Tiberius as emperor and Pontius Pilate as governor, that the crucifixion took place. Now, having brought down the secular events to the first coming of Christ, the angel goes back to the beginning of the Jews' dealings with Rome and brings down a direct line of events to the second coming of Christ. Now for part 2 of this prophecy of the 11th chapter of Daniel, from the league between the Jews and the Roman Senate to the reign of Christ. Verse 23. And after the league, the Jews, made with Rome, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small people. This referring no doubt to the growth of Rome from a little nation to a ponderous power, and so it certainly was in history. Verse 24, he, that is Rome, shall enter peaceably upon the fattest places of the provinces. Some of the very best provinces came under Rome's dominion without war. And he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches. Instead of stripping some of these provinces, even though obtained by battle, great wealth was distributed among the people. Yea, and he shall forecast his devices, he shall think his thoughts from Rome against the strongholds, even for 360 years, that is, for a time. A time, the word called a time in this prophecy, is a prophetic year, or 360 prophetic days. But a prophetic day stands for one literal year. So 360 prophetic days equal 360 years. Rome became master of the world. These years must be reckoned from the time that she did become master, on the defeat of Egypt at the Battle of Actium, B.C. 31, September 2. The time will end 360 years later, sometime during the year AD 330, when Rome would cease to be the fortress from which wars were planned. And Augustus Caesar shall stir up his power and his courage against Antony and Cleopatra with a great army. Cleopatra was the queen of the south. And they shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but Antony shall not stand. For the Romans, now notice what the Romans did with this Egyptian army, and it's a mixture of Greek armies too that Antony had raised to help Cleopatra, and the big navy, which she added to, about half of the ships, by the way, shall forecast devices against him. Then Cleopatra, in the middle of that battle, deserts, and then Antony follows. And as soon as the army heard of it, they went over to Augustus. We reading verse 26. They, yea, Antony's allies, that feed of a portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall go over to Augustus, and many shall fall down slain. 27th verse. And both these kings, that's Antony and Augustus, both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Their efforts to make Rome eternal would not prosper, nor did their efforts to divide the world between themselves and still be friends. That did not take place. In spite of everything, they became enemies and continued enemies until Antony came to his end in Egypt when he followed Cleopatra, and she died by her own hand when she caused the poisonous asp, the poisonous serpent, to bite her. It was sent in to her in a bunch of flowers, so that someone had apparently given her these beautiful flowers, and the dangerous snake was hidden in them. This was done at her command, so that she would not have to grace a Roman triumph for Caesar Augustus. She couldn't endure the thoughts of it. So she died there in Egypt, in Alexandria. And Antony had already died at his own hand. Then shall Augustus return into his land with great riches. The covenant of God, or the holy covenant mentioned in this verse, is in its broad meaning the gospel, or the good news to man. So in prophecy it would not only cover the words of the promise, but the word of God, the promised land, the plan of salvation. We think it here refers to the land of Canaan, included in God's promise to Abraham. Then shall Augustus return into his land with great riches, and Titus' heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. At the time appointed, Constantine shall return. Now we're going on down fast till the empire becomes Christian in 330, and come forward toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. The times appointed, or the end of the 360 years, ended in AD 330, at which time Constantine made Byzantium his capital and called it Constantine City, or Constantinople. Some people called it New Rome. Rome ceased to be the fortress from which devices were to be forecast. It ceased to be the capital of the Roman Empire. And this empire's capital then was moved over to the Bosphorus, where we call it today Istanbul. Now, 30th verse. For the ships of Carthage shall come against Rome, or the ships of Kittim it's called here in the prophecy. Therefore Rome shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. Roman emperors shall even return and have regard unto them that forsake the holy covenant. Against the true gospel, or those who hold fast the true profession of faith, they began to fight, began to work. And here this statement that they shall have regard unto them that forsake the holy covenant refers to the agreement between the civil arm and those professing Christians who left the cover of God's mighty arm to accept the help of the state. And arms shall stand on his part, shall stand on the side of eastern Rome, which with those that forsake the holy covenant shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, Rome. And they shall take away the pagan worship, and they shall place the papacy. The arms of eastern Rome, now the empire had been divided, united with apostate Christianity, nominally found at that time, to take away the pagan worship of the country. And the papacy is placed in AD 538 by decree of Justinian, made effective on the overthrow of the three Arian powers. Remember that there were three powers who did not accept the orthodox teaching of the deity of Christ. And these three powers followed the teaching of a man called Arius, and were called Arians. These three powers were the Vandals, the Heruli, and the Ostrogoths, three of the Germanic tribes which divided up the Roman Empire in these days. And so this great change took place. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall papal Rome corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits, those who keep the knowledge of the truth uncorrupted. During those days there were many true believers in all countries, especially the mountainous areas where they could hide and hold up the purity of the gospel, like the Albigenses and Waldenses, the Paulicians, and many simple believers who, when the state and the church were united in a worldly system, continued on to be faithful to God. And they, the Waldenses, Albigenses, and others that understand among the people, shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. That refers to the 1260 days of papal supremacy, no doubt, from 538 to AD 1798. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helping with a little help, with the Reformation, in other words, but many shall cleave to the reformers with flatteries. The Reformation did not stop the martyrdom of dissenters from Romanism, but helped to bring the 1260 days to an end. The Reformation became popular, and many joined, not of principle but of policy. The next terrible step was the uniting of the Reformed Church itself with the state. Persecution again resulted. Verse 35, and some of the reformers shall be martyred to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. The power of the papacy is here distinctly said to reach the time of the end. By this we may know that that period spoken of as the time of the end begins at the close of the papal 1260 years, or in other words, in AD 1798. And the king, that is France, who had now become the leading power in Western Europe, shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself. This was true. The French Revolution came on and brought France into a very high position, militarily and otherwise. Shall magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. This was the great atheistic movement of the French Revolution. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the marriage relation, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. France defied God, officially, the only nation that ever did. Abolishes the marriage tie, the sacrament of adultery it was called by a witty actress. The state was made supreme, for he shall magnify himself above all. In the place of the true God shall France honor the God of liberty and country, and later the goddess of reason, whom his fathers knew not, represented by, or typified, we would say, in the person of Madame Maillard, who was taken into Notre Dame Cathedral and worshipped in a way that no one should worship except God. It was this revolutionary France which invaded Egypt, the land of the King of the South, with a great army led by Napoleon Bonaparte himself. They were able to capture Alexandria, march on up into Palestine, and commit many great evils upon that land. But they were not able to stay there because of the British fleet which blockaded the Mediterranean Sea. And finally, after besieging Acre for quite a long while, Napoleon was compelled to retreat back into Egypt, where he took ship and sailed for France, leaving his army in Egypt, many of whom never did get home again. This brings us down, you'll see, to almost our own time. It's about 200 years ago when these things took place, identifying the King of the South as still Egypt, and whoever occupies the territory of the northern part of Alexander's kingdom is still the king of the north. This time Turkey had taken over Palestine, Arabia, Mesopotamia, Syria, Asia Minor, good deal of territory in what is now Greece, and a lot of territory not only in Egypt but on out west in Libya. So the Turkish Empire at its height, acting as king of the north at that time, because she occupied the territory of the king of the north, had a strong war with Napoleon and was largely involved, along with Britain, in forcing Napoleon to leave the Middle East, which he did. And in 1798, this war took place, fulfilling the prophecy, and the time of the end began, and papal suppression stopped in Western Europe, and the prophecies brought us up to the start of what we call real modern times.
This has been another classic sermon from the archive of American Christian Ministries. This recording has been digitally reprocessed from the original audio cassette or reel-to-reel in order to make this CD available. The audio quality was improved as much as possible. International copyright, American Christian Ministries. All rights reserved. To order a copy of this or other presentations, or for a free catalog, please call toll-free 800-233-4450. International calls dial 717-652-7000. You may also order from our secure website at www.americanchristianministries.org. There you will discover the largest selection of authentic Adventist preaching available. You can trust ACM. There is no compromise here. If American Christian Ministries has been a blessing to you, why not take a moment just now and send us a note or an email with your testimony? We'll share it with our speakers and volunteer workers to encourage them. Your prayers and continued financial support are very important to ensure the continuation of this ministry as we help prepare America and the world to meet Jesus Christ. He's coming soon.